Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about missionaries, voluntourism, and how some people with a heart thinking they're going to do something nice by traveling to a poor country end up doing more harm than good.
It sells wealthier people access to impoverished and struggling communities in exchange for a life-affirming experience.
For some of these people, I genuinely question if they really thought they were doing good to begin with. But I guess you'll see for yourself and tell me. Have you ever had a friend in your class who went to Africa when they were in high school, or maybe in between high school and university, and they constantly talk about how they were there to save the kids? Likely, they were part of something called voluntourism, when you feel like you can go to poor countries or countries that are worse off than your country, at least, typically people from Western countries, thinking for some reason, purely because they're from a country that is richer, they automatically have the ability to teach or do construction work, maybe because they feel like they are there to help, often with zero context of the background or the historical context of the country in which they volunteer in, and end up doing a lot more harm than good. But let's first touch on missionaries. In many circles, they're still looked at as massive heroes because they go to these impoverished countries, non-Christian countries even, poorer countries especially, and try and save all of these starving people with Christ Almighty, obviously. And oftentimes they come with gifts, they come with diseases, medication, all sorts of stuff. There is a book written by a indigenous activist who actually ended up saving 500,000 acres of land. In her book, Namonte recalls how these missionaries came in when she was a kid, and basically how they converted elders or even different people in the village to Christianity via absolute fear-mongering. If you want to read it for yourself and pull your hair out of your scalp because of how frustrating it is, you can check out this book. It accounts of what she went through when she was a child, what she witnessed, and eventually also how she ended up saving a lot of lands. It references how the missionary that came to save their village was called Rachel Saint. Ironically, she was not a saint at all. You could be like, oh no, I would never believe anything she says, but imagine if you've never heard of Christianity or this like being, and this person just comes in and says like, you will die, you will burn in the fire for behaving this way. And she was even quoted to call the devil black, having a heart that's black, and Jesus being white.
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god!
So clearly,
What is that?
she was also racist as heck. And this was all accounted in the book because that's what the kids were taught. She would do teachings to the children. So yeah. And often when the village people would get ill or something, she would give them a paracetamol or a painkiller and said that this is the Lord's work, this is God's pill, rather than saying it's science. Later, it was found out that Rachel was given a lot of money by oil companies to actually go in, converted the elders. She basically made the decision for them and made the decision on behalf of the village to start drilling and start giving them clothes, like Western clothes, combing their hair a certain way, basically trying to make them behave civil, because obviously they were savages. And knowing what we know now about the climate, you can imagine how often this has happened to all sorts of other groups as well in different ways. However, when you start using religion literally as a weapon to scare the hell out of people just so that you can bring in oil companies, you can imagine how evil that is. This is just a very small introduction to what she did, but she is one example of a missionary. Another, Renee Bach, is a more popular one who opened a whole ass clinic for a few years. Opened a clinic and they found out she wasn't even a doctor. She wasn't even a doctor, a nurse, nothing. She healed the children by touching them and feeling what God was telling her. And she would have an Instagram at the time. And she would post all of these children who were starving and have their weight sometimes. Our newest little Lovisa, this 5-month-old, is weighing at 1.2 kilos at 5 months. Join us in prayers for this sweet girl. Hashtag malnutrition. Hashtag itty bitty. Are you insane? How can anyone look at this and be like, no, she's just doing the Lord's work? 10 years ago, Renee Bach left her home in Virginia to set up a charity to help children in Uganda. One of her first moves was to start a blog chronicling her experience. Yeah, we've seen it. Hashtag malnourished. And it's so sad because these people come to them thinking that they're actually there to help. She even talks about how this parent came to her and gave her a child because she was talking about how when I pulled the covering back, my eyes widened. The baby's name is Patricia. She is 9 months old. The parents had been unable to find anyone closer to home who would cure her. One of her relatives told them about a hospital with a white doctor. Except Bach was not a doctor, she was a 20-year-old high school graduate with no medical training. And not only was her center not a hospital, at the time it did not employ a single doctor. It's just a white lady who thought, hey, let me save some kids by touching them and feeling what God is telling me. And this also highlights the absolute lack of regulation in different African countries, either from the lack of resources or there are groups of people actually profiting from it. And that's voluntourism, a multi-billion dollar industry. There was a video that was released on Vice about how someone who was in the voluntourism industry who came out after realizing that it was extremely messed up.
Each of us paid thousands of dollars to go on this trip. Of that trip fee, almost none of it went to the orphanage.
Also tries to preach to them in terms of ideology and telling them, oh, hey, you're queer? Yeah, come out. We encourage you to come out.
We were a predominantly white group. When I was in Tanzania, a young woman was questioning her sexuality and was being encouraged by this volunteer to live openly.
Not knowing at all the political climate or the current social situation at the country they're in. They are not in the US, they are not in Europe. If they come out, they could very well be in a very risky position.
The reality of this young woman's life was that she lived in a community where doing so would put her at very great physical danger. And so this volunteer was so focused on her own moral compass and moral values that she couldn't quite see how the advice she was giving this young woman could potentially kill her.
Just because it works in your country doesn't mean it works in other countries. Not to mention, a lot of these people who go to poor countries and try to build houses. And because it was so badly built, because no one is trained.
The primary goal, we were told, was to build a library. Our work was so bad.
They, for some reason, think that the local people in Africa just have zero skills whatsoever. So you have to come in and build stuff, even though you yourself have no skills.
Local builders who were working alongside us would come back while we were sleeping and undo our work and redo it.
Rather than just giving the money to local construction companies where they themselves can also contribute back to the economy.
Kids would see vans of volunteers pulling towards them and they'd quickly rub dirt on their faces so that they'd be more appealing, ironically, to the volunteers and look like they needed more help.
The people who are earning money from voluntourism would want the children to appear more poor. If you don't have poor people, there'll be no one to come to voluntourism for. So they kind of have to keep up that appeal or that look.
The directors of the orphanage did not see the children's health as a priority. That when residents did get malaria, they were not provided with medical care. The leadership of the orphanage were unwilling to spend the money.
Because voluntourism makes poor people a commodity to sell. At the end of the day, if they're not poor, you're not going to go and help them. So the people who want to profit from voluntourism will constantly keep this image alive and will constantly keep the poor people poor.
I told one of the chaperones from my school on the trip about what I'd seen and was advised to keep it to myself. If they see kids sleeping on a good bed with a good mattress, they won't donate money for better beds and better mattresses.
The kids who will have their toys taken away because they want people to keep donating toys.
That the orphanage director then goes and gives to his own kids or sells or locks in a closet so that the next group of volunteers will donate bags of toys. Because if they see kids playing with tons of toys, they won't bring toys.
That comes to also donations. The donations that you send not always goes back to the people. In fact, it even has adverse effects in a sense that it has taken away the businesses and opportunities from local textile companies because everyone is flooding the market with secondhand Shein products or these fast fashion clothes, with the US being the largest exporter of used clothing. The donated clothes causes harm to local textile industries. And so the people who actually want to find work and want to contribute to the economy or have money to feed their own kids and stuff are losing their jobs because of it. And that's why Rwanda, for example, are very strong in terms of imposing tariffs on imported clothes because there's just too much. And they ended up being in landfills and in dump sites. The UK, Europe, Africa all contributes to this. An estimate of 40% are such poor quality that they are deemed worthless on arrival and end up dumped in a landfill. These colleagues decided to do some math after finding out that the church that they go to have been sending money to an orphanage in Uganda for years. And they have sent close to 200,000 at this point. They asked the people in the church if the orphanage has been successful in reunifying the children with their families, or has it looked for local foster or adoptive families, or even have a license to operate legally. The team didn't know how to answer these questions, which then indicated to them that they carried out little to no due diligence for the orphanage that they were sending money to, which inspired them to do some math. They found 150 trips that were planned to visit Ugandan orphanages in 2016. While many trips did other activities, the orphanage visit was usually the most significant and certainly the most emotionally compelling part of the trip. We analyzed the trips and found that on average each trip cost $3,000 per person and had 12 participants. That's more than $5 million spent on mission trips to Uganda, money that could have been put towards much needed welfare reforms and social services. To put this into context, the cost of closing an orphanage of 30 children, addressing the core reasons for separation and supporting the families for at least a year, cost $12,000. $5 million and $12,000. According to this math right here, you could have helped a further 416,666 people. That is insane. Not only that, at least 80% of the children in the orphanages have at least one living parent. Some in Uganda say is a lot higher. A lot of these orphans aren't really orphans. If you yourself are a high school kid in Europe and you are thinking of doing one of these yourself, please look into it and look at exactly what you're doing and to see if it actually is voluntourism or is something that can actually help local communities. So what can you actually do? You have social media. Check to see if what you want to do is something that you are qualified to do in your own country. Or if you can't do what you want to do in your own country, what makes you think that it's okay to suddenly do it because someone else is poorer than you or worse off than you. It doesn't make any sense. And on top of that, you can also check to see if someone's already doing something that you want to do, or just talk to them, ask them what they need. Because unless the underlying problems which causes their material inequalities, unless those things are solved, it's unlikely that you having no certification or any form of skill that could help in that area, you could end up causing more harm than good. It's important to note that volunteering overall and helping your community is not a bad thing. You are helping to create an environment where you are contributing positively rather than harming the environment and making it a whole tourism industry. At the end of the day, helping is not a bad thing. Volunteering is not a bad thing. If you end up, I don't know, coming out of it having killed a bunch of people, or having harmed a whole bunch of people, or having the local economy become unstabilized because of your help, then perhaps you should reallocate your resources to actually helping. So when you're thinking of volunteering, if you're doing it for CV reasons, if you're in between university and high school and you need something to fill in that gap, and that's the reason you're doing volunteering and the only reason, then perhaps the volunteering is not for the people you're volunteering for, and it's more for yourself. Do I think it's bad per se? If you end up contributing to the voluntourism industry and end up causing more harm to the local communities than benefit, only for you to get something a little nice on your CV, you have just put a community into detriment so that you can look better in front of some boss. Or can it be both? Maybe you want something on your CV and you want to help people. That's great. Do your due diligence. Don't end up accidentally harming communities. On top of that, why is it that you're only volunteering when you need it on your CV? If that is your only reason to volunteer, that is. Why is it only a CV thing? The whole point of volunteering is that you're trying to help someone that's worse off than you, in a worse situation than you. Right? Isn't that the whole point? So why is it that it's only something you do for one summer when you're 18? Isn't it something you should consistently do throughout your life? Am I saying you should dedicate your whole life to volunteering and only volunteering? Of course not. But to only do it as a one-off thing because you want to say that you've helped people before and then never look at it ever again and go back to your in some cases very cushy life where you never really have to look at or even think of a starving person, also kind of a shit thing to do, right? You just kind of think of them once in your life and never think of them ever again. Am I saying that you won't have your own hardships and you have to constantly worry about others? Absolutely not. Everyone has their own hardships. So when you think about volunteering, not only can you volunteer and help starving kids across the ocean, you can also do community volunteering.
Going outside and helping the community out and just building a garden or helping cleaning up a river.
Digging out a drainage, staff appreciation dinner, helping out at Heron Point with Service Council. We do the blood drives, book drive, volunteer at the hospital, the local animal shelter, local schools.
A lot of community service experiences, you walk in not knowing anyone, and by the end of it, you have new friends and you've also helped the community.
We could actually see the benefits.
Volunteering and getting involved with the community really helps us to understand where we are in the greater picture of the community.
You don't actually see everything that you hear about in the news unless you participate in community service.
It widens your perspective because you meet people that you never would have met otherwise, and you get to see how a lot of other people live.
It's impossible to have a complete disconnect between people and the places where we live.
And so we have this responsibility to constantly give back.
You're a part of this system, whether it's a system of people or a system of all the organisms in an environment.
The water around here is beautiful, the public parks.
The environment impacts us, and we impact the environment and have to be aware of that.
Tenemos nuestra mercancía, nuestra farmacia, nuestra ferretería, nuestra selva y sabemos vivir, sabemos cuidar. Tenemos que nosotros mostrar al gobierno, al mundo, que nuestro territorio existe lleno de vida.
Real obligation to this place.
It's really important just to realize the connectedness between us all.
Everything we come out here and do makes this place that much better, that much more the place that everyone wants it to be.
Volunteering really can just bring us all together.
It gives me optimism for the future. Really seeing how much good is in people.
That helps you, that helps your community. Community care is also self-care. If your neighbors are doing well, if your friends are doing well, if the people around you are doing well, you feel better. You do better. If you really want to volunteer and you don't have the resources to travel across the ocean, you can 100% volunteer in your own community. There are many ways you can do it without harming communities that are already worse off. If you're talking about Africa or even India for voluntourism, how your government is playing a role in destabilizing that country, how certain companies, corporations are exploiting local communities. These people are already in a shit position. They don't need someone to come in and make their situation even more shit. So, you have a good heart, you want to go out and volunteer. Make sure at the end of it, the people that you're helping are better off than when you left. Stay safe, take care. Till next time, thank you very much for staying to the end of this video. Bye!